Great. Okay, so it's great that I can be here to talk to you about animal advocacy as a form of effective altruism. But as you can see, I'm also wearing this badge from The Life You Can Save, which is an organisation that spun off the book that Rob mentioned that I wrote called The Life You Can Save in 2009. There's now this international organisation which exists in many places, including Melbourne. There's a Melbourne group if you're interested in belonging to it, and it's working for global poverty. So these are two issues that I've worked on over the years, and I think it's great that they come together under the umbrella of effective altruism. But I am here today to talk to you about the animal issue, and following something like the kinds of themes that Rob began with to introduce what we're talking about. It's a question of what are the problems, what is the size of the problems, the importance of the problems, and which are the neglected problems. So I'm starting off with a cute photo so that you can all go, ah. And of course the answer to this question, I'm sure for everybody in the room, is no, you would never harm a gorgeous little kitten like that, and I'm sure that's true. On the other hand, if I show you a shot of battery hens, egg-laying hens in cages, which unfortunately are still pretty standard like this in Australia, although they have been at least modified in Europe, and some of them are disappearing in the United States. That's a different question. And any of you who are just walking down to the supermarket and buying eggs that come from caged hens are contributing to the harm that these hens are constantly enduring. And if you're buying pig products too, unless they're humanely certified, they may be the piglets of sows kept like this in an individual stall, also still permitted, without even room to turn around and without any bedding to lie on, as you can see here, just lying on a bare concrete floor, and living like this for her entire pregnancy, which is actually most of her life. That's her useful life, that's her role, to be a breeding machine. So maybe a little more sympathy for pigs than hens, but on the other hand, probably much less sympathy for fish, which, if we're talking about wild-caught fish, at least we are not interfering with their lives, but there is no humane slaughter for the commercial fishing industry. So in terms of how they died, they will die a death with more suffering than the animals that I've just shown you. All right, so where does this get us? What I'm suggesting is that we have very different attitudes to different species of animals, and that in itself isn't something that we can ethically defend. The principle that I've argued for since writing Animal Liberation back in the 1970s, and I think it's one that has still stood up to philosophical discussion and criticism that certainly comes around any principle, but I certainly still defend it, and I think it's gaining increasing acceptance, is that we ought to give equal weight to the similar interests of every individual, irrespective of race, sex, or species. Of course, I put in race and sex because, again, you probably all accept that already there, but if you accept that we shouldn't give less consideration to the interests, similar interests, of someone on account of their race or sex, then why is species going to be any different? Now you might say, oh, but the interests of different species are less similar than the interests of human beings of different races or sexes. That's true, but I do have the word similar interests here. I'm talking about where we can compare interests. Interests, for example, in not feeling pain, in suffering, not suffering in various ways. So, not following this principle of equal consideration, I've used the term speciesism, which is now also in fairly wide use, again, to make that parallel with racism and sexism. something that we ought to reject. But whereas normally when I talk about speciesism, I'm talking about the speciesism that we use when we favour humans over non-human animals, which is really the basis of the way we treat non-human animals in general, I now also want to recognise that there can be speciesism that leads us to favour some species of animals over others, particularly those that we feel more attracted to, or those that where we are in close personal relationships with members of that species, which obviously is mostly cats and dogs. So I think we ought to reject both kinds of speciesism, and that if we think that this is wrong, these are dogs being captured in order to be sold for food in Asia, if we think that this is wrong, then we ought to think that this is wrong. These are chickens being raised for sale in supermarkets in this city, and pretty similar methods of production everywhere in the world. 20,000 chickens maybe in a single shed, very crowded. And also, and this is something you can't see here, bred to grow so fast, bred to put on weight so fast, that by the time they start to get close to the weight at which they're going to be killed, their legs are not mature enough really to support their weight. And as a result of that, experts who've looked at it say that they are in chronic pain for the last weeks of their life, and in some cases their legs will actually collapse under them and they will simply die of dehydration or starvation because they can no longer move to get food. The food is in these lines, food and water is coming down through these pipes. And of course there's no individual veterinary care, that would be ridiculous, they're just not worth it in commercial terms, so they'll just lie there and die. And those are why Professor John Webster, who's the founder of what's, I think, perhaps the largest centre for research into animal welfare in the world at the University of Bristol, certainly one of the largest, says that raising chickens is the single most severe systematic example of man's inhumanity to another sentient animal. So the problem is there, the severity of the problem, going back to the things that Rob was talking about, is there. And the size of the problem is there. We have to look at quantity. So let's look at it. If we're talking about numbers, then whereas the number of vertebrate animals killed annually in research worldwide, which is another big issue that animal community often focuses on, is about 100 million, which seems like a large figure. If you compare that with the number just of vertebrate land animals, put aside the fish, killed annually in food production, it's around 60 billion. So food production uses roughly 600 times more animals than are killed in research. Now, you might say, yes, but do they suffer as much as the animals in research? Well, let's have a look at an interesting graph that talks about that. The size of these circles do not represent simply the numbers that I was talking about a moment ago. If they did, the one on the left, the chickens, which would be something like, the majority of that 60 billion animals would be, 40 to 50 billion, would just take over the whole slide. What this is the number of chickens who don't actually survive to slaughter. And remember, these are very young animals. They're killed at 6 weeks of age, 42 days. So if they're not surviving to slaughter, they're dying painful deaths from something going wrong. As I said, maybe their legs have collapsed under them so they can't move. Maybe they've succumbed to the stress of the crowding. Chickens have not really evolved to live in those sorts of very crowded situations. And of course, they're not with their mothers as they normally would be. So they're deaths that involve suffering, and there's about 140 million of them. And if you compare that with the number of animals killed in shelters, for fur, and in laboratories each year put together, you can see that it's close to 6 times as many. So even if you just focus on that and just talk about chickens, you would find that farm animal welfare is a vastly larger problem than all the other animal problems put together. But where does the money go? Now we get to the neglectedness issue that Rob was talking about. This is a quote from Wayne Pacelli, who's the president of the largest animal welfare organisation in the United States, the Humane Society of the United States. So he is probably talking about US figures, but I'm guessing it's not going to be all that different here. And it's his estimate that whereas 90% of the money going to the cause of animal protection is devoted to cats and dogs, animals abused on farms or in laboratories, he's adding them together here, receive a tenth of that available resource, though they represent more than 99% of the animals at risk. So if we want to be effective animal altruists, then I think we need to redress that. And this is my last slide, which shows the same sort of thing from basically another source, from Animal Charity Evaluators, which is an organisation and a website that is trying to evaluate animal charities. Again, it's American-based, and it's not, I don't think there's any Australian charities in its top recommended lists. But if you're looking at what's going on here, then again you have the number of animals used, and you see the colours. So the farm animals are the grey area, it's virtually all of them, and the lab, and then you probably can't even see from the back. The shelters is this tiny little green slice on that, and clothing, fur is the other one. And then you look at where the money goes, you see the complete disproportion. This tiny little barely visible green line on that side has blown up into whatever it is, 2/3, 3/4 of the entire chart, and the farm animals now are down in this small grey block over there. So this is a problem, I think. If we're concerned about animal advocacy, we need to try to educate people in terms of looking at what is effective. The final thing that I haven't mentioned, and just very briefly, is to say that what Rob calls solvability, sometimes called the tractability of the problem. Can we actually have an impact, you might say? Well, we can help some rescued dogs and cats, but we can't do anything about factory farming. That's clearly not true. The animal organisations in this country and elsewhere in the world have had a significant impact on factory farming. They've reduced the severity of the confinement, less, I'd say, unfortunately, in Australia so far than in the European Union, but still, some progress has been made. Certainly we have now far more availability of free-range eggs than existed before the animal movement started, when in fact when I started getting involved in this in the 1970s, you could not buy free-range eggs legally in Victoria. Legally, you could not buy them because all eggs had to be supplied to the Victorian Egg Board, which bulked them, didn't distinguish how they came from. So there was no commercial incentive to produce free-range or cage-free eggs at all. Now, of course, if you walk into the supermarket, you have that choice. So yes, we can make an impact. And of course, by promoting vegetarian and vegan diets, we can also reduce the number of animals who are going to be suffering in these forms of confinement as well. And there's some evidence that that's starting to make an impact in developed Western nations anyway. So I think the problem is solvable, or at least reducible, and because it's such a huge problem, I think if we're interested in doing something to reduce animal suffering, that's where we ought to be doing it. Thanks very much.